Well, first of all, again, I think politically, what we have seen over the last, um, you know, uh, couple months, ever since the set of indictments came down in New York, is that they've actually made Trump a stronger political force, both in the primary and as it pertains to going against Joe Biden in a general election. So I think politically speaking, he doesn't seem to be being harmed by that. So let's start with that. And secondly, look, my guess is that this thing will get drawn out legally. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about it happening in the middle of any kind of primaries.
In a moment, we'll be getting more reaction to Donald Trump's appearance in court in Miami. He has pleaded not guilty to 37 criminal charges of retaining classified documents after he left the White House. These include obstructing the government's efforts to get the papers back. We hope to be speaking to Trump's former White House press secretary in just a moment. In fact, he's on the line now. So let's go straight to Sean Spicer. Sean, a very good evening to you.
Good evening.
When you were serving Donald Trump in the White House, did you ever expect to see him in court on such serious charges?
No, I mean, I don't think we ever expected to see any president in court the way that today went down.
And what did you make of the appearance and the proceedings against him?
Well, look, I mean, I think if for those people who are aware of our judicial system, I mean, this is the first step, right? You make an indictment about the charges against somebody, you lay them out, and then they have an opportunity to defend themselves. They're presumed innocent, and it's the government's job to lay out a compelling case and hopefully, in their perspective, win over all the jurors. But I think we have to keep today in context. It is the first step. And we'll see how this goes on. I mean, it wasn't until just the other day that Trump actually got to see the indictment against him. And so we're at the beginning of what I imagine is going to be a fairly lengthy process.
Donald Trump himself has talked about how it's a rigged system, a system rigged against him. He has pleaded not guilty to all 37 charges. But those allegations he faces do potentially carry, pretty serious sentences, up to 20 years, some of them, including that one of obstructing the authorities from getting the documents back. It is extraordinary to think of Donald Trump still trying to stand for the presidency despite facing such extraordinary charges.
It is, except for, I mean, I think there's a reason. A poll came out in the last 24 hours that show, 81% of Republicans believe that this is politically motivated. And that's on the heels of several other polls that believe that most Americans, a majority of Americans, believe that the charges against Trump are motivated. Now, look, there's a lot of people who don't like Donald Trump. That's been made pretty clear. But I think what we're seeing now is a lot of Americans question the use of the judicial system, whether it's being used to extract political retaliation against Trump, and how much of this is part of that.
Do you not think that there are dangers in a former president creating such uncertainty and lack of faith amongst voters in the court system, which is a pretty important part of the US Constitution?
I'm kind of missing the question here. I mean, I think if you believe that the system is being used inappropriately, what would you have him do? Just sit back and do nothing? He's voicing a concern that I think many Americans share, which is that we don't have equal justice right now. We have a system where several people on the Democratic side have mishandled and misused classified information over the last several years, and in each case, there was no charges brought against them. I think that there is a big question for a lot of Americans about how the system of justice is being applied.
How do you see this process unfolding now? Clearly, Donald Trump and his legal team want to challenge these charges. But, I mean, the case could come to a full trial just at the time that he needs to fight the primaries if he's going to get the Republican nomination.
Well, first of all, again, I think politically, what we have seen over the last, um, you know, couple months, ever since the set of indictments came down in New York, is that they've actually made Trump a stronger political force, both in the primary and as it pertains to going against Joe Biden in a general election. So I think politically speaking, he doesn't seem to be being harmed by that. Um, so let's start with that. And secondly, look, my guess is that this thing will get drawn out legally. So I don't think we're gonna have to worry about it happening in the middle of any kind of primaries.
You talk about him being a strengthened political force, strengthened perhaps in the eyes of Republican supporters and the Republican movement. But surely this is going to make it very difficult indeed for him to actually win a presidential election.
Again, with all due respect, I see this is take a look at the last few recent polls. ABC News, which is no friend of Republicans, just put a poll out there showing them several points up on Joe Biden. I get that a lot of folks in the media don't like him. I get they're against him. But at some point, the facts have to be taken into consideration. And right now, the polling that's out there in terms of the general election either shows Trump tied or leading. So again, I think sometimes people who proclaim to be journalists need to be guided by facts.
Uh, but perhaps that is because they are convinced by his rhetoric, which goes back to the other question that I was.
So, but hold on, stop. What do you think a campaign is? Both sides present their rhetoric. I mean, Joe Biden said he was going to be a uniter. He clearly hasn't. That's what a campaign is about. Each side goes out there, makes the most compelling case they can to voters, and voters choose on it. Sometimes for right, sometimes for wrong, sometimes one argument carries the day. But at the end of the day, I get it. I just told you that you were wrong about your assessment of the general election, and you pivoted to, yeah, but maybe that's not the right message. I mean,
well,
right
I was
message
asking
for a
questions,
campaign
Sean. I wasn't making an
no, you weren't.
assertion. I was I was questioning you.
No, you weren't though. But you said, but it's not going to help him in his reelection. And as I pointed to you, the data doesn't suggest that. So it's an uninformed, biased position that many in our country and clearly in the UK take, which is, it's be damned with the facts. We're going to let our personal biases overwhelm what should be real journalism.
The other question I wanted to ask is whether there are any risks, any dangers, and whether you have any qualms about someone in Donald Trump's position using his rhetoric to encourage voters not to trust the judicial system.
Well, look, as I said, I think I answered your question a moment ago. I think everyone's got a right to express themselves in America, and if they don't feel like the judicial system is being fairly, and I can tell you, I mean, look, the case against Joe Biden and the possession of classified documents that he had for years in multiple locations, in multiple unsafe locations, including boxes by his Corvette in an unopened, unsecured garage, should be concerning. And you have to ask yourself, why wasn't that a concern of the same folks? Why wasn't James Comey, who oversaw the Hillary Clinton case, when he leaked information to the New York Times, why wasn't that taken care of? I mean, there's a lot of circumstances. So he has a right to plead his case and tell the American people why he thinks that he's not being treated fairly. That's absolutely within his right to express himself to the American people with respect to his case. That's part of our Constitution, and that's part of his right as a defendant in a case.
Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary to Donald Trump. Really good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, good evening. Take care.
Well, that was Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary to Donald Trump.